Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. I wish I could say that I never believed in anything as horrifying as what people now call the Outbreak. I used to make light-hearted jokes about how society loves scaring itself. But everything changed on September 16th, deep within the chaotic subway tunnels beneath New York City. My name is Daniel Carter, and I'm typing this from a borrowed laptop in a makeshift refugee camp on the outskirts of Queens. If you're reading this, please know that this is a true account of the days I spent trapped in Union Square Station when the first wave of infected overtook the streets above. In early September, news outlets reported strange incidents throughout the Bronx. People wandering in a disoriented manner, with an unresponsive gaze. The authorities responded as if it was a sudden spike in drug misuse. But more residents claim these individuals attempted to bite anyone within reach. Social media flared up with theories, some kind of new infection, a bizarre psychological phenomenon, maybe a contamination in the water supply. I paid only half attention. I worked in Manhattan as a data analyst for a small tech startup, and my time was spent focusing on quarterly earnings reports and data sets, not these sensational stories. But by the morning of the 16th, my phone chirped non-stop with alerts. The official city app posted a chilling banner. Emergency alert. Avoid highly populated areas. Unidentified infection spreading. I wondered if it was a glitch or a hacked push notification. Every major news channel broadcasted footage that seemed straight out of a horror movie. People stumbling through intersections, traffic lights blinking over abandoned cars, and a looming sense of confusion emanating from reporters on the scene. That day, I was headed to Union Square for a quick lunch meeting with my boss, Jeremy Wolfe, who insisted we gather in person to finalize an important contract. All I could think about was how strange it felt to navigate Midtown with so many sirens in the background. My usual approach to the city was rational and calm. That morning, though, the entire atmosphere felt as if an invisible wire had been pulled taut across every street corner. I hopped on the 6 train near Grand Central, ignoring the ominous scrawl of warnings on social media. The train was less crowded than usual. Maybe people took the alerts more seriously than I did. When we pulled into 14th Street Union Square, I stepped off, only to find the station abuzz with anxiety. Station announcements crackled overhead, and digital signs blinked an urgent message. Emergency, please proceed with caution. As I walked toward the exit, a chaotic group rushed back down the stairs. One commuter yelled that the streets above were blocked off by law enforcement in hazmat gear. Another claimed infected individuals were roaming the park. Confusion swarmed around me, so I retreated into the station's central corridor, hoping to wait for clarification. It was then that a final announcement boomed through the overhead speakers. Attention! Citywide lockdown in effect. Please remain within the station. Do not attempt to exit. Further instructions will follow. That was the moment I realized it wasn't just a glitch or rumor. Something catastrophic was happening right above our heads. The station gates began sliding down with a heavy rattle. A uniformed transit worker tried to direct everyone to remain calm. The thick metal shutters cut us off from the outside world in under a minute. I remember the dull clang as the final gate slammed closed. A faint hush spread among the hundreds of people stuck inside. Union Square Station can feel like a maze at the best of times. There are multiple subway lines intersecting, shops along the mezzanine, and various access points to the underground passages. As soon as the lockdown triggered, an echo of frustrated voices stretched across the corridors. No one had any answers, only theories. A message repeated over the speakers every 5 minutes. Attention! This station is now under quarantine. Do not attempt to exit. Officials are responding to a developing health crisis. Please stand by. Those words were all we had to cling to. In the dim fluorescent light, groups of people clustered in corners. Some stared at their phones, desperately trying to contact loved ones or check news updates. Others simply paced, scanning the area as if searching for an escape route. Every so often, the overhead lights flickered, casting unsettling shadows along the tunnel walls. My own phone pinged with a text from my co-worker, Anna. She sent a shaky video from her office window, showing parked ambulances surrounding entire blocks of Lower Manhattan. She wrote, "Daniel, they're telling us to shelter in place. I see people staggering around. Are you safe?" I replied, telling her I was stuck in Union Square Station. My message wouldn't send. The cell network was overloaded or partially shut down. I tried in vain to call my boss, to see if he was inside or outside. No luck. I was alone amidst a sea of worried faces. Despite the tension, station staff attempted to maintain some order. A middle-aged man in a reflective transit vest corralled a few of us near a kiosk. He mumbled something about an emergency supply closet in the staff area. My instincts told me to volunteer to help retrieve anything that might be beneficial, so I followed him into a restricted corridor. That decision would set in motion events I never could have predicted. We made our way past a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." 2 workers accompanied me, as well as a stranger who introduced himself as Martin Cohen, a mild-looking man with grey hair and wireframe glasses. He said he worked at a finance company near the station. We had to navigate a narrow hallway that smelled faintly of stale coffee and disinfectant. At the end of the corridor was a small storehouse, packed with cleaning solutions, spare bulbs, and various station maintenance tools. A battered TV set in the corner was tuned to a local news channel. That's when I saw the first definitive footage. They were calling it a zombie infection, though the anchors were careful not to use that word too often. The on-screen text read, "Viral outbreak, citywide quarantine." Grainy camera images showed uniformed officers in full protective gear forming barricades. The words from the reporter were frantic. "We've seen these, infected, congregating in large groups, displaying extreme aggression." Even the calmest staffer in that storage room struggled to hide deep worry. Without stating any physical reaction, it was clear from the way he rested a trembling hand on the table that he wasn't sure how to process the broadcast. Then the feed cut out, replaced by a looping emergency screen. We decided to gather whatever we could: bottled water from a dented case, a first aid kit, a few flashlights, and random items that could serve as tools or barricades. Martin carefully picked up a length of thick metal pipe. He whispered that it might be wise to have something for defense if those things come down here. I wasn't sure how to respond, so I just nodded. Our little group returned to the main station floor. Over 100 individuals had congregated near the turnstiles, each desperate for fresh information. I spotted a young woman in tears, calling out for her mother. A handful of travelers huddled around a phone playing a clip of news coverage. Words like infection and outbreak echoed in hushed tones. That was when an amplified announcement roared, "Attention, do not open the gates. Infected civilians sighted on street level. Law enforcement engaged. Remain in place." A flicker of panic raced through the crowd, pushing a few to rush towards the gates in defiance. But the gates were locked and immovable. 1 or 2 individuals tried forcing them open, only to earn desperate pleas from others to stop. No one was certain if letting the outside in would risk unleashing a horde. It wasn't the time for heroics. In the hours that followed, we discovered there were multiple vantage points to the outside world. Narrow stairwells, glassed-in sections along the station's perimeter, and a service entrance that led up to some vendor stalls. Through these spaces, we glimpsed chaos in Union Square Park. Figures shuffled among upturned trash bins and abandoned vendor carts. Sometimes we heard frantic yells or the echo of distant horns. Inside, station staff tried to create a semblance of order. A cluster of volunteers emerged, some handing out bottled water, others offering phone chargers, or gathering folks who needed medical attention. Among these volunteers was a tall, broad-shouldered police officer named Sam Parker, who revealed he had been assigned to guard the mezzanine level before everything spiraled out of control. He had a small radio clipped to his belt, though the signal crackled more than it transmitted. Sam's calm but firm voice did wonders. He set up a check-in desk by the MetroCard machines and requested anyone with medical training to step forward. That's how I met Evelyn Rodriguez, a soft-spoken nurse from Bellevue Hospital. She had hurried into the station seeking safety when she realized the entire hospital was in emergency lockdown. Clutching a small backpack, she brought along basic medical supplies. It was around this time that I noticed a pale-faced teenage boy sitting alone against a pillar. He was staring at the ground, knees drawn in, eyes unfocused. Evelyn approached him, gently asked if he was hurt. He didn't speak, but he blinked at her in distant acknowledgement. She looked back at me with concern. That look alone told me the station's population contained more than just anxious bystanders. We had vulnerable people too, those who might not handle the stress or had already gone through unimaginable experiences. As afternoon blurred into evening, the overhead lights occasionally dimmed or flickered. The city's power grid was under enormous strain, with entire neighborhoods losing electricity. That on and off glow cast dancing shadows across the tiled walls, stirring everyone's tension. Nobody mentioned it openly, but the possibility of losing power and lighting terrified us more than any direct statement of fear ever could. Night fell in the city above, though we had no sunset to measure its arrival. The station's clock read 9:07 p.m. The overhead announcements stopped. The radio Sam carried produced only static, occasionally punctuated by coded bursts of chatter. We rummaged through any news source we could find, but nothing definitive came. Gossip circulated. Some said the entire city was overrun by a zombie horde. Others claimed a vaccine was on its way. A few insisted that the infection was airborne, though the fact that many of us were fine contradicted that rumor. Evelyn treated minor injuries. One commuter with a broken arm had stumbled trying to outrun the chaos on the street. Another had scratched up legs from being caught in a scuffle when the gates came down. She improvised splints using boards from a broken bench and taught me how to assist with wrapping. We formed a sort of triage corner near a vendor stand. Even so, I could sense that the emotional toll weighed heavily on everyone. Martin Cohen kept pacing the station floor, occasionally offering quiet words of optimism, but I caught him glancing frequently at that metal pipe he'd carried back from the storage room. Sam Parker took the initiative of forming a perimeter, encouraging small teams to scout different segments of the station. There were sections near the N/Q/R platform that were poorly lit, places that could conceal threats. I volunteered to help. We carefully walked the length of those quieter tunnels, flashlights sweeping across the deserted platforms. The only sounds were the soft dripping of condensation and the distant rumble of a train that seemed to have halted somewhere deeper underground. Then, in one tunnel leading toward the L train corridor, we spotted something slumped on the floor. My flashlight settled on the outline of a figure. A station janitor crouched nearby, whispering for help. The figure on the ground had apparently lost consciousness or was non-responsive. But as we approached, we realized something was terribly wrong. A low, continuous rasp filled the air, like labored breathing but far more disturbing. The janitor backed away in alarm, and Sam tried to calmly address the prone figure, but it jerked upright in a stiff, unnatural way. I won't use words of explicit violence, but the sight was alarming. This person's clothing was torn. The angles of their limbs looked off, and there was a feral glare in their eyes, something that made me take a step back. Sam shouted for them to remain still. Instead, the figure lunged for him with unnerving force, as if their muscles could only move in abrupt attacks. The uniform's reflective stripes flickered under my flashlight as Sam pivoted away just in time. No one wanted to harm this person, but it was clear they weren't rational. The janitor scrambled behind a bench, and Sam attempted to subdue the individual using the minimal force he could. The moment Sam tried to hold them down, they twisted in a contorted manner. A guttural rasp sounded, echoing across the tiles. We all realized simultaneously what this meant. The infection had made its way into the station. This wasn't rumor or speculation. The outbreak was right here among us. Sam managed to handcuff the infected individual to a section of railing, primarily to prevent them from injuring themselves or others. The moment Sam and I saw the half-open mouth, the wide, disoriented eyes, and the unnatural spasms, we knew we were looking at the very thing the emergency broadcasts warned about: a human being reduced to a cannibalistic, unresponsive state, a zombie, for lack of any better word. The janitor rushed off to find Evelyn or someone else who could help. Sam radioed for backup, but all he received was an unintelligible burst of static. We had to maintain composure. He asked me to stand by, flashlight pointing in that direction, while he tried to contact other officials deeper in the station. I'll never forget the frantic writhing of that infected person, the unsettling scratch of metal cuffs on the railing. I kept telling myself that this was real, not a film set. Before long, Martin and Evelyn arrived, bringing a handful of concerned bystanders. Evelyn immediately tried speaking in soothing tones, though the infected individual gave no indication of recognition. Martin hovered behind her, gripping that metal pipe, prepared for something far more dire. This standoff continued for several tense minutes until we realized there was no chance of normal communication. In a calm voice, Sam asked Evelyn if she had any sedation in her kit. She shook her head. She had brought only basic medical supplies. At that point, no one had any illusions. The station's population was in immediate danger, especially if more infected were roaming the corridors. We needed to seal off that section and warn everyone else. Word traveled fast among the trapped crowd. Anxiety deepened. If even one more infected was out there in the station, our entire group risked exposure. A wave of realization spread. We didn't know who might be bitten or carrying the infection. People started eyeing one another suspiciously. Conversations turned into whispered negotiations about how best to handle the situation. An idea arose: block off the entire corridor leading to the L train platform. Sam guided a small team to gather debris, overturned trash cans, a few maintenance carts, and we piled them in front of the corridor entrance as a makeshift barrier. It wouldn't hold back a determined assault forever, but it at least provided an early warning if more infected approached. As the station's residents settled into an uneasy night, makeshift groups formed. Some people sought Sam's leadership, trusting that his badge and training gave him the best perspective. Others clustered around Martin, who increasingly spoke about taking matters into our own hands. He pointed out that law enforcement outside might be too overwhelmed to rescue us, and we needed a proactive strategy, potentially an escape attempt. Tensions rose. Whispers circulated that Martin was looking for volunteers to search for a path out, possibly forcing open one of the station gates or emergency exits. But many, myself included, worried about letting a horde of infected in. Meanwhile, Evelyn worked tirelessly in the triage corner, caring for anyone who felt faint or had minor injuries. She warned that if the infection spread through fluid exchange, as news reports suggested, anyone with even a minor scratch or open wound was at risk. She began checking folks carefully for suspicious signs: discoloration around the eyes, abnormal twitching, that glazed stare we had seen in the infected individual. No one else showed any blatant symptoms yet. I stayed near Sam, offering help where I could. He remained calm but firm with anyone who pushed for reckless action. He used that radio of his sporadically, hoping to catch snippets of official updates. Once or twice, we heard faint voices. It was something about the National Guard being deployed to major thoroughfares, including near Union Square. They were advising all citizens below ground to remain sheltered until further notice. That piece of information encouraged many to stay put, just wait for rescue. Martin, however, declared it was nonsense. He insisted that the National Guard had no reason to prioritize a random group of survivors in a station. "We're on our own," he muttered over and over. A few younger men agreed, claiming we should at least attempt to see what was happening on street level. By early morning, an uneasy hush settled in. The station's permanent residents tried to grab some rest, lying on benches, leaning against walls, or dozing near the dim glow of phone screens. Some tried to ignore the distant scraping sounds coming from the blocked corridor. The lone infected figure we'd left handcuffed was out of sight but never out of mind. Hours blurred together. By the time the station clocks read 8:10 a.m., the overhead lights had flickered off multiple times. The smell of stale air weighed on everything. People were hungry, and we knew that water supplies would run out soon. We'd found a few vending machines in staff-only areas, but that meager stash wouldn't last more than a day or two. Sam decided we needed a station-wide briefing, so about 50 or 60 of us gathered near the central concourse, though I was certain others were still scattered around. With all train operations silenced, the space felt unsettlingly quiet. Every shift of feet, every whisper, seemed amplified. Sam spoke in a measured tone, explaining that law enforcement was actively engaging infected mobs on the surface, and that a coordinated rescue operation might eventually reach Union Square. He urged us to stay calm, pool our resources, and remain in well-lit, populated areas. Then Martin stepped forward, arms crossed, the length of pipe angled against his shoulder. He argued that we should force an exit open and push for the surface in a structured retreat, suggesting that the infection might already be taking hold in the corridors. At once, the crowd's opinions fragmented. Some, desperate to escape, nodded at Martin's plan. Others warned that opening the gates could draw an entire horde of infected inside. A shaken commuter described spotting multiple infected near the entrances right before the lockdown, while another insisted that, left to our own devices, we had no real chance of surviving unless rescue came from above. In the midst of the debate, a commotion erupted from the triage area. Evelyn shouted for assistance. We raced over to find her trying to restrain the same teenage boy we'd seen earlier. He was lashing out wildly, eyes unfocused, making low groaning sounds that sent a chill through everyone watching. An older woman standing nearby gasped, backing away. This boy, who had seemed so withdrawn the day before, now displayed the hallmarks of the infection, a mindless desperation to grab or bite anything within reach. Evelyn had pinned one of his arms down, but he kept twisting with surprising force. Sam stepped in, asking for rope or anything to keep him from injuring people. Martin hovered to one side, face tense. We managed to subdue him. Evelyn kept repeating that she hadn't seen any bite marks on him earlier. He had looked physically intact. That raised a terrifying question. Could the infection be transmitted through the air, or had he been bitten before we found him? No one had a clear answer. The immediate result? More panic. People began moving away from each other. Whispers circulated about hidden scratches or infected saliva on surfaces. The sense of communal safety started to collapse. Sam had no choice but to isolate the teenager in a corner of the station, using belts and zip ties to keep him from hurting himself or anyone else. Evelyn hovered close, torn between her duty as a nurse and the possibility he might lunge at her again. I assisted with giving them space and tried to calm the growing crowd. Martin muttered something about how we can't keep them all alive, then quickly fell silent when he realized others were listening. All illusions of unity cracked. People began dividing themselves into clusters, some trusting Sam's approach of cautious containment, others aligning with Martin's more aggressive stance. A few drifted away entirely, choosing to remain alone. A tall woman in a business suit marched toward a maintenance gate, determined to force it open, only to be talked down by onlookers. Every so often we heard sounds from the blocked corridor. It was never a full assault, just sporadic scraping or dull thuds against the makeshift barricade. The unknown presence back there weighed on our minds. Some of us quietly wondered if the entire corridor was now teeming with infected. The power supply in the station had begun fluctuating more severely. Each time the lights cut out, the darkness felt absolute. Phones and flashlights were our only beacons. We had to ration battery power. Oddly, it was in one of these short blackouts that I realized the scariest thing wasn't the infected we had seen, or even the possibility of a horde. It was the creeping knowledge that any one of us could be the next to exhibit strange symptoms. Suspicion turned individuals into potential threats. After a second restless night, Sam decided we needed more definitive information. If we could locate the station's main control room, we might access the security cameras or find a functioning radio channel. Gathering a small group, which included me, Evelyn, and Martin, he led us through a secured door near the administrative offices. Another corridor stretched before us, dimly lit by flickering emergency bulbs. We stumbled upon several small rooms used for official transit purposes, file cabinets, ticket records, even an unused break room. They were largely deserted, with the heavy silence only broken by our footsteps. Another locked door blocked our path, but Sam, using a borrowed master key from one of the staff, managed to open it. Inside was a cramped command center with a wall of monitors and a console for station-wide announcements. Many of the monitors displayed static, but a few flickered with black and white camera feeds from different parts of the station. We switched channels until we spotted the blocked-off corridor. The vantage point revealed at least 4 or 5 infected individuals wandering near the barricade, dragging their feet in slow arcs. One camera angle showed the street-level entrance, where the thick metal shutters remained sealed. We caught glimpses of movement outside, shadows crossing the glass. It could be the National Guard, or more infected. It was impossible to tell. Next, Sam tried an old radio set that rested on a desk. He turned knobs, scanning frequencies. Static dominated most channels. Then, a faint voice broke through. Words were hard to make out, but I caught something about Central Evac Zone and 46th Street. Sam responded into the mic, identifying himself, calling for assistance. The voice repeated in a broken signal that rescue operations had been forced to reroute due to large gatherings of infected. Then the channel dissolved back into white noise. Martin stood by the monitors, jaw set. He pointed to a separate camera feed showing a small emergency exit corridor off the R-train platform. It appeared deserted, and Martin's idea was to gather a few able-bodied volunteers to break through the exterior hatch. Sam argued that we should wait for instructions, but Martin insisted that official help was nowhere near. Both men looked to me and Evelyn for input. Evelyn hesitated. She asked whether such an escape attempt might draw every infected in the area straight to our location, jeopardizing everyone else in the station. Martin grew agitated. He said, "Do you want to be stuck here forever, waiting for a miracle?" Sam cautioned that we needed more time, maybe an actual plan of evacuation that included the elderly and injured. In the end, we left the control room in the same uneasy balance we had been in before. We shared the knowledge that infected filled a corridor, but we had no guaranteed path out. A plan that might have worked could just as easily doom us all. By the start of the 3rd day underground, frustrations reached a boiling point. Food was scarce, and more people were displaying symptoms of stress and exhaustion. Rumors spread about a second infected individual wandering in an unseen part of the station. The triage area was overwhelmed by folks who simply felt faint or disoriented. In one corner, an argument broke out. 2 men insisted that we should forcibly remove anyone who showed the slightest sign of illness, lock them in a separate tunnel to prevent a bigger outbreak. Others were horrified by the suggestion. Sam tried to intervene, but Martin appeared, fueling the tension by saying that the city's meltdown required drastic measures. A scuffle erupted when one of the men tried dragging away a woman who coughed. Others rushed to her defense, shouting for him to back off. The man turned on them, yelling that he was only doing what had to be done. Several onlookers surrounded him, urging calm. It was at this fraught moment that a loud crash rang out from somewhere near the barricaded corridor. People froze. The crash repeated, a rhythmic pounding, far more intense than any noise we'd heard before. Scraping echoed along the tile walls, and we realized the horde of infected might be actively trying to break through now. Without electricity or a functioning overhead announcement, only Sam's strong voice carried across the station. "Everyone to the main concourse, now! We need to stand together." We gathered at the center, eyes darting towards the corridor entrance. Bits of debris clattered as the pounding intensified. Flashlights illuminated the makeshift barricade shaking under repeated impacts from the other side. A creeping sense of finality settled over us. Sam tried to coordinate a defensive formation. Martin urged that we open an alternate route and lure the infected there, giving us time to flee. The station reverberated with fear, not from any single expression on a face, but from the frantic movement, the halting words, and the sense that the world above might already be lost. Evelyn ran to her triage area, urging all injured or vulnerable folks to move to an inner hallway away from the barricade. She whispered reassurances, though no one felt reassured. The teenage boy was still tethered in a corner, thrashing occasionally with vacant eyes. Then, with a final smash, part of the blockade gave way. A heavy bench tumbled forward, and battered trash cans slid across the floor. Through the gap, a pair of infected figures lurched into view, arms reaching hungrily. A wave of confusion hit. Some of our group rushed forward, trying to shove them back. Others backed away in shock. A terrible scuffle ensued. The infected individuals swiped at anything that moved, uncoordinated but relentless. They were joined by two more from behind, pressing the advantage. Sam and Martin found themselves on the front line, pushing with improvised shields made from station signage. The crowd behind them scattered left and right, caught between the impulse to flee and the fear of leaving others to fight alone. I remember stumbling backward, nearly tripping over a discarded bag. My flashlight spun across the tile floor, beams dancing in the gloom. The infected advanced step by step, forcing Sam and Martin to yield ground. Another volunteer swung a metal rod, knocking one infected sideways for a moment. But they never stopped lunging. Their eyes seemed devoid of any reaction to pain. Amid this chaos, a tearful cry split the air. I glanced over to see Evelyn near the triage corner, checking on an older man who had collapsed. She beckoned me to help her move him. I darted over, my mind spinning with the realization that the station was about to fall to the horde if we couldn't regroup. In the confusion, I lost track of Martin. He might have charged forward or retreated with others. I couldn't tell. Sam barked frantic orders, telling a few people to maintain the line, while others corralled everyone to a safer area. Working together, Evelyn and I half lifted, half dragged the older man down a side corridor. The teenage boy was still thrashing in that corner. Evelyn quickly saw that leaving him there would be a death sentence. She gestured for me to assist. The boy was struggling, snapping blindly at the air, so we carefully shifted him onto a rolling office chair we'd scavenged. Even in the middle of this crisis, Evelyn refused to abandon him. When we emerged again into the main concourse, we saw the horde had grown to at least 6 infected. Our volunteers formed a shaky defensive ring, pinned near the center. Sam spotted us and motioned us toward the control room corridor, our last fallback. We rushed back through the corridors we had navigated earlier. People followed in a disorganized line, some helping the wounded, others scanning every side corridor for lurking infected. Occasionally, we heard the echo of frenzied moans behind us. The station's labyrinth of tunnels offered no easy exit. The locked gates and steel shutters had become our prison. At the control room, Sam propped the heavy door open, while we ushered survivors inside. Around 20 of us packed the narrow space, including a handful of kids, a couple with an infant, and a few older folks who could barely walk. In the dim light, I could see the tension etched into every face. The infected were still behind us, somewhere in those tunnels. Their uneven footsteps seemed to scrape against the tile floors. Time felt suspended, each second marked by rapid glances at the door. Sam told me to check the monitors. My hands shook so badly that it took me 2 tries to switch them on. We saw silhouettes moving through the main station corridor. The camera angles were spotty, but it was clear the infected weren't numerous enough to fill the station, yet they moved with purpose, searching for more survivors. I cycled through a few more feeds. One showed the smaller emergency corridor. It looked mostly empty, though a shadow occasionally crossed the edge of the screen. Perhaps that was an infected on patrol, or maybe it was a living person trying to hide. We had no way of knowing. Martin suddenly appeared at the doorway, panting. He'd lost his pipe, A fresh scrape glistened across one sleeve. He stared at the group around us, then locked eyes with Sam. "We can't wait here. We have to break out now," he hissed. Sam shook his head in frustration. "We don't have a route. We'll be ambushed." Martin swore under his breath. He pointed at the monitors. "That corridor is barely guarded. We slip out." Evelyn intervened, voice low but firm, warning that we have more than a dozen people who can't move quickly. Trying to outrun the infected could be impossible. Martin replied that staying here meant certain destruction for everyone. A silent understanding passed between the survivors. We had to do something. The question was how to give ourselves the best chance of success. Sam stepped toward the corridor, scanning for anything that might serve as a blockade or decoy. Martin insisted the only real hope was to break the emergency hatch in the corridor that led out to an alley near Broadway. I forced myself to study the monitors once more, searching for patterns in the infected's movements. They tended to roam in slow loops, occasionally pausing to investigate corners. If we timed things correctly, we could possibly slip by, but it would be risky. Evelyn volunteered to accompany the group, especially the wounded. I could see how drained she was, but her resolve never wavered. Sam told me to help Martin forcibly open the exit hatch if we got that far. He warned me not to let my guard down around Martin. He'd grown increasingly erratic under stress, though we still needed his determination. A rough plan began to form. Sam and a small group of volunteers would attempt to divert the infected by drawing their attention away, while the rest of us, burdened with the injured, would follow Martin down the emergency corridor in hopes of breaking through to the street. None of us knew whether the surface was overrun with infected or if rescue forces had already arrived, but one fact was clear. Staying underground meant inevitable disaster. We crept out of the control room in two groups. Sam and his volunteers hugged the left passages, occasionally knocking on walls or shouting to lure the infected away. I glimpsed a cluster of them staggering toward the shouts, arms reaching, moans echoing. The sound made my skin crawl. Martin led us right, deeper into the station's secondary corridors. The broken overhead bulbs left huge swaths of darkness, so we relied on a few flashlights. We walked in single file, carrying the older man on a makeshift stretcher. Evelyn pushed the office chair with the restrained teenage boy, who occasionally tried to snap at passing shadows. Every corner we rounded brought the potential of encountering more infected. I found myself scanning every doorway, half expecting a figure to lunge. The hush was only broken by shifting feet and ragged breathing. At last, Martin paused by a metal service door labeled Emergency Exit. We tried the handle. It wouldn't budge. He gestured for me to stand back, then used a crowbar he'd picked up along the way to pry the door's latch. For several tense seconds the metal groaned, but wouldn't give. Behind us, a faint shuffle indicated movement. One of the kids let out a small cry, and Martin redoubled his efforts. With a sharp crack, the latch broke. We swung the door open, revealing a narrow stairwell leading upward. The air smelled slightly fresher, though tinged with dust. We carried the stretcher up step by step, hearts pounding in a silent concert of dread at what lay beyond. At the top of the stairwell, another door led outside. Early morning light seeped through the cracks, illuminating swirling dust in the air. Martin tried the handle. It too was locked from the outside. This time we wasted no moments. Martin jammed the crowbar against the frame, straining with every ounce of strength. I helped, pushing until the door gave a deafening metallic screech. We stumbled onto a side street near Broadway, overshadowed by tall buildings. The road was eerily silent. Several cars sat abandoned, some with doors open. Litter skittered across the pavement. No immediate signs of infected or rescue teams. Evelyn guided the stretcher onto the sidewalk. The teenager on the office chair was more agitated in the open space, thrashing so violently that two men helped hold him. We paused, scanning in all directions, not certain which route was safest. Then, from behind a row of parked cars, we saw them, a handful of infected drifting aimlessly. Their heads jerked up as soon as we emerged. Martin raised his crowbar, and one of the others hoisted a length of metal pipe. Without traffic noise or city bustle, the infected's guttural moans carried across the deserted street like a warning. We had no choice but to press forward. The children clung to the adults, and Evelyn led the way, eyes darting. We tried to slip around the group of infected, who were ambling across the intersection. If we could keep enough distance, they wouldn't close in. The entire scene felt like walking a tightrope stretched over a chasm. As we skirted around the intersection, I heard a sudden roar of engines. My attention snapped to a pair of Humvees with National Guard markings rumbling down Broadway. They swerved at the sight of infected in the street, braking to avoid plowing into them. Several soldiers leapt out, forming a defensive line. With practiced coordination, they tried to contain the infected using riot shields. I signaled wildly, hoping they'd see we were survivors. The soldiers waved us over, shouting for us to hurry. Martin sprinted ahead, beckoning everyone to follow. We half-carried the stretcher and pushed the office chair as fast as we could. The infected, startled by the noise of engines and the sudden commotion, turned in confusion. One lunged toward the lead Humvee and was swiftly subdued by the soldiers. Within moments, we found ourselves behind the soldiers' barrier, protected from the staggering infected. They led us to a checkpoint hastily assembled with portable fencing. Other survivors huddled there, guarded by a few uniformed officers. It was a surreal change of environment, from the darkness of Union Square Station to the crisp morning light of a nearly abandoned Manhattan street patrolled by the National Guard. An officer approached, asking us questions: which station we came from, how many were still inside, how many infected we had encountered. Evelyn tried to explain the dire situation underground, mentioning that Sam Parker and others were still inside, but we'd lost contact. The officer scribbled notes and directed us to a bus that was being used as a temporary transport to a relief center in Queens. We hesitated. Part of me wanted to insist that we go back for Sam and the others, but the National Guard officer firmly stated that no one was allowed to re-enter the station. They had orders to seal off infected zones until specialized teams could clear them. We stood there, hearts torn, uncertain whether Sam or the rest would ever emerge. We were herded into the bus, which rumbled through the streets on a roundabout route, avoiding major infected hotspots. The windows revealed an altered city, silent avenues, barricaded intersections, small clusters of infected visible in the distance. Occasionally, we passed a group of desperate survivors waving from upper-floor windows or rooftops. Our bus ride ended at a large staging area near the Queens Midtown Tunnel exit, where the National Guard had set up tents and fencing. Rows of cots filled what must have once been a parking lot. Volunteers handed out bottled water and ration packs. Medical personnel were on hand to screen arrivals. We lined up, bleary-eyed, seeking reassurance we might find normalcy again. It was there that Evelyn and I parted ways with Martin. He insisted on joining another group of volunteers determined to head back into Manhattan for supply runs. I didn't stop him, though I doubted the wisdom of such a mission. After all we'd been through, he still believed in direct action to rescue those left behind. Evelyn stayed with me, helping the relief workers treat new arrivals. The teenage boy remained sedated in a medical tent, guarded by staff who were preparing containment procedures for infected patients. The older man on the stretcher was tended to by a team of professionals who offered more advanced medical care than we ever could have in the station. Days passed at the relief camp. We heard conflicting updates about containment zones, official quarantines, and rescue operations. Rumors swirled about entire city blocks infested with infected hordes, while some neighborhoods reportedly remained infection-free. No one could confirm the fate of Union Square Station. Sam's name appeared on lists of missing personnel. I tried checking daily, but official rosters were disorganized, changing as quickly as the crisis evolved. As of now, I remain in this relief center, volunteering at the registration desk, guiding newcomers to available tents, occasionally updating digital records for the National Guard. The infected threat is still out there, but city agencies have started coordinated sweeps and rescue efforts. It's said that the worst wave might have peaked, or it might resurge at any moment. Looking back, it feels like my entire life was compressed into those 3 days beneath Union Square Station. In the darkness, an unlikely community formed out of fear and desperation. We experienced heroism from people like Sam and Evelyn. We witnessed the extremes to which individuals like Martin would go in the name of survival. We saw the infection firsthand, and we understood how swiftly it stripped away human thought and left behind something terrifyingly unrecognizable. What I can't shake is the question of whether Sam and the other volunteers managed to hold out long enough for a rescue team. No official records can tell me what happened in the final hours of that station lockdown. Perhaps help arrived. Perhaps they found another exit route. Or maybe they sacrificed themselves to save others. The uncertainty weighs on me more than any direct physical memory. Even now, I still have the battered flashlight from the station. The lens is cracked, but it works if I shake it enough. It reminds me that sometimes, in the darkest places, a flicker of light is all you need to keep going. I've shared our story with people in this relief center, and many nod with recognition, saying they heard similar tales from other parts of the subway system or from neighboring cities. The outbreak tested all of us, bringing out the best and worst in humankind. I hope that by recording these events, I can help preserve the truth of what happened. When people talk about a zombie infection, they often imagine gory spectacles or sensational horror. But the reality was a slow burn of isolation, uncertainty, and a society on the brink of unraveling. It was the fear that anyone could be next, or that a small mistake in judgment could unleash irreversible consequences. To anyone reading this, remain vigilant, but also remember the value of unity. We survived because a nurse tended the injured. A police officer did his duty. A group of strangers built barricades. And yes, even because a determined man named Martin refused to accept we were doomed. If another outbreak should strike, if the infection resurfaces, our greatest advantage lies in our ability to help one another, to stand together, and to cling to hope, even when the shadows stretch across the floor. So this is my account, a real glimpse into a crisis that once existed only in fiction. May it serve as a testament that a zombie outbreak is not just a macabre idea, but a threat that can bring our civilization to its knees. In those cramped tunnels, we discovered how quickly humanity can fracture, and how swiftly we can rebuild trust when survival hinges on cooperation. I pass this record on with humility, wishing only that it helps prevent someone else from dismissing the alarm the way I once did. Because when you're locked underground with the infected pounding on a barricade and no promise of rescue, you learn that even the simplest sense of normalcy was a gift beyond measure. And now, the final shutters on Union Square Station might have been reopened or permanently sealed. Truth be told, I don't know. But the memory of that place, the flicker of lights in the gloom, and the sound of those ominous announcements will stay with me forever. If you ever find yourself there in the aftermath, maybe you'll feel the echo of our footsteps, sense the panic that once clung to the air. Or maybe you'll hear something else, the quiet persistence of those who refused to be lost to the outbreak, who fought the infection not only with barricades and flashlights, but with the unspoken promise that humanity is worth saving. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.